protest. This is a complete distinction. This is burning down of places of worship, thuggery, violence, racism.
Okay, but the issue is, for lots of people, what these events became was a proxy for this underlying issue that we've never in this country been able to get on top of.
Matthew Goodwin walked into this interview thinking he was about to have a debate. Mehdi Hasan walked in with his actual quotes, his actual statistics, and his actual voting record. It was not a debate, it was a dismantling. I want you to picture something. You are sitting across from someone who used to call themselves an academic, someone who built their entire reputation on being rigorous, data-driven, and sober in their analysis. And then, live on camera, you pull out their own words and show the audience that the numbers they cited on national television were not just wrong. They were not even close. We are talking about claiming more than 50% of social housing in London is occupied by non-British people. The real number? 14%. Not 50. 14. That is not a rounding error. That is not a misremembering. That is the kind of claim that only survives when nobody checks it. And here is what makes this clip something you need to watch right now. Goodwin did not just get the numbers wrong. He got caught defending a woman who wrote on social media that a mosque should be blown up, with the adults inside it. And his argument was that she deserved a second chance because she deleted it and said sorry. I will let that sit with you for a second. I am Silas Miller. This is Miller's mandate. And this is exactly the kind of moment we exist to break down. Hit subscribe, and let's get into it.
Matthew Goodwin, thank you for joining me on Head to Head tonight. You and I have known each other kind of indirectly online through conversations about over a decade now. But your views are very different, I would argue, to what they were when I knew you back in the UK here in 2011, 2012, 2013, when many would say you were a champion of diversity, multiculturalism, immigrants, Muslims. You were calling out the far right. Your critics now say, Matt, that you have become, quote, a part of the right populist movement you once sought to explain, that you've gone native with them, that, quote, instead of writing about the radical right, you've become part of it. So let me start tonight by asking, what happened to you?
Well, as somebody once said, when the facts change, I change my opinion. And over the last 15 years, I've become convinced that mass immigration is a failure, one of the biggest disasters in recent public policy. I think the elites in Western countries have fundamentally lost touch with the voters in those countries. And I think that unless we change course quickly, we're going to have some really big problems.
A lot of people sympathise with that view, of course. Although over the summer, we saw a very extreme, violent opposition to immigration. The UK saw horrific race riots, sparked by the murder of 3 young girls in the town of Southport. We saw mosques and asylum hotels attacked, police officers attacked, over 1,000 people arrested. In a post for your Substack, you called the people at those riots, quote, ordinary people who feel like they're losing their country and trying to, quote, exercise their voice. It sounded to a lot of your critics that you were justifying those riots, these horrific racist riots. We just had an election in this country in July. That's how you exercise your voice in a democracy, not via rioting when you don't get your way at the ballot box.
Well, protest has always been part of our political DNA, and obviously everybody would disassociate themselves from the criminality and the violence in the summer. I certainly wrote about it, I condemned it. But as Mark Easton and other liberal commentators at the time noted, there were also ordinary people protesting about what has been happening to their country. And that isn't just about mass migration, it's also about the breakdown of borders, it's about feeling unsafe in their own community, in their own country. And for people who engage in violence, they should have been rounded up and sent to prison, as many of them were. But there were lots of peaceful protesters at those events as well. And the polling afterwards, Mehdi, was quite revealing. Over 60% of Brits said, yes, I blame the people who engage in violence, but actually 63% said, I blame recent government immigration policy for these protests. And what I was trying to do in that piece is to say, look, there is clearly a lot more going on here than these idiots and morons who are trying to set fire to a hotel or attack a mosque. What we have in this country is a social fabric that is breaking down, and we need to talk about it.
There was mixed polling. I mean, YouGov also found that the protests, even the protests, were only supported by 1 in 3 Britons, 34%. In fact, only 1 in 6 said that people causing unrest had legitimate concerns. It's interesting that you say you condemn the violence, but in your big Substack post on the riots, you only condemned the violence against the police. You did not condemn the violence against Muslims, Asians, the attack on a mosque in Southport. There was not one word from you about that, and you wrote a 2,000-word piece.
Well, I'm sure I did at the time, and I condemn it now. I think nobody in their right mind would say that was somehow excusable, but clearly what was going on there was a bit like during the BLM protests in 2020. We had a national conversation about the legitimate injustices that underpin those protests. It did result in the injury of 30 police officers and lots of unrest in America, as you know better than me. Cities like Portland were largely devastated by protests and anarchism. But yet we still had this mature conversation about what is going on here.
But just to be clear, the Black Lives Matter protests were not like this. 90% of the protests in the US, according to one academic study, showed they were peaceful. There was no comparison. Even Priti Patel, not known as a kind of liberal, muesli-eating, sandal-wearing leftist, hardcore right-wing Home Secretary under the Conservatives, said there's a clear difference between that and then. She says what we saw during the pandemic protests, the BLM protests, was protest. This is a complete distinction. This is burning down of places of worship, thuggery, violence, racism.
Okay, but the issue is, for lots of people, what these events became was a proxy for this underlying issue that we've never in this country been able to get on top of, which is we promise the British people one thing, which is control and lower migration, and then we do another. Priti Patel's an interesting example. You say she's hard right. I'd say she's the most pro-immigration Home Secretary we've ever had in this country. Now, if you're a Conservative voter in Northern England, you were promised in 2019 lower migration, lower overall numbers, and a high-skill policy. And then the government that you elected gives you the absolute opposite of that, puts everything on steroids and says, to hell with you. You're going to be frustrated and you're going to be angry.
I just want to deal with these riots issues, because you say you condemn it now. You didn't condemn it in your post. You even wrote sympathetically, Matt, about a woman who went to prison in the UK because, according to you, quote, she wrote something very offensive on Facebook and you objected to that. Can you tell us what she said?
Yeah, she was a full-time carer for her husband, and she wrote something along the lines of they should blow up this mosque, and I think she said something hideous. People.
Yeah, blow the mosque up with the adults in it. You don't think that merits a prison sentence?
If somebody writes something on social media in their own home, however offensive I might find it, I don't think they should go to prison. That's my personal
You don't think
view.
people can incite violence on social media? It doesn't matter whether she's in her home. She's inciting violence.
If it's clear incitement, they should be in prison. What I
blow the mosque up with adults in it.
She also
is that clear incitement?
She also very quickly deleted it. She expressed sorrow. I believe in Christian notions of forgiveness. If somebody says, I'm sorry, I say, give you a second chance.
Do you know how many Muslims have gone to prison over the last 20 years for saying much less than that on social media?
Well, I can disagree with that. It's the same principle as non-crime hate incidents. I think what we're living through is an Orwellian imposition from above that I think lots of people in this country, the home of individual liberty, common law, Magna Carta, repel against. I'm one of them. I don't think we should be doing that.
Here's what really bothered a lot of people about your post, and actually really undermines, I would argue, one of the key arguments you make in your book. You say we should treat people as individuals. Don't become obsessed with group identities, ethnic identities, racial identities. And yet you wrote about the guy accused of murdering these 3 little girls, that he was the son of immigrants from Rwanda. Why is it relevant that the suspect is the British son of Rwandan immigrants?
He ultimately was a product of migration. He was a second-generation migrant. We know from a lot of research that cultural practices, traditions, values, different ways of life tend to pass down from first to second, third generation. We know he came from a very conflict-ridden society, Rwanda.
We have no idea what his motivation is. The police don't know. What do you know that they know?
Well, one of those potential motivations, let's see what happens.
But why didn't you wait to see what happens before you made a kind of slur against Rwandan immigrants?
Because the fact is, this ultimately was a symbol. I think.
How is it a symbol? It's got nothing to do with his parents, unless you have some evidence that the police don't have.
As I said in the original piece, for many Brits, what happened in the 12 days of that hot summer, we saw young British Muslim lads assaulting police officers in Manchester Airport. We saw a young second-generation lad stabbing a British Army officer almost
What's that got to do with your description
because
of the
just hear me out. In the course of a week, we saw the Southend machete gangs, mass violence. We had the riots in Leeds. We had evidence of communalism in other parts of the country. We had sectarianism at the general election just a month before.
In your opinion?
With independent,
this is your opinion?
Well, for lots of Brits, when you put that together and you look at the course of those things, I think what 2024 will come back to be seen as was really a watershed moment in our debate over...
I understand, but you're avoiding the question, Matt.
No,
and we've got limit. You are.
I'm coming to the central point,
Well,
which
please, deal with the child of Rwandan immigrants. I want to nail this down.
Is Britain an integrated society? And do the people who are coming
What
into
evidence
Britain,
do you have? You seem to be implying all sorts of things
Well,
about
I think
someone
it's...
we know nothing about.
Well, I think going out and doing a mass stabbing and going on a
mass stabbing is very British. Sorry to break it to you. A lot of British people do stabbings and killings. This kid was a Brit. Is a Brit. Or is he not a Brit to you?
It depends how you define national identity.
Wow. So am I not a Brit?
No, I think it's, do you respect the country that you live in and do you follow the rule of law?
So it's a conditional citizenship?
It's not conditional.
You just said it depends on whether you respect the country you live in. For somebody who doesn't want to judge people on group identities, why are you bringing up the parents of this kid? Do you have any evidence?
We have lots of evidence.
You do?
Social science has lots of evidence that the second, third generation migrants bring over certain cultural habits, traits, practices.
Murder.
No, but for example, second generation British Muslims, for example, will express higher levels of religiosity.
He wasn't Muslim. That's part of the problem.
No, but the underlying point...
No, because you're dodging the point here. This guy was the son of Rwandan immigrants, and you cannot explain to this audience why you thought it was relevant to bring that up.
I've just explained.
Because Muslims bring communal practices.
No, I've said I think it's obviously about immigration. He is a product of immigration.
That had nothing to do with it, as far as we know. We don't, but you're the one making the claim, not me.
I'm saying, in the context of that week, there are lots of questions to ask about to what extent was this guy integrated into
don't
wider
make
society?
Sweeping statements. Here's the problem, Matt. Your critics would say that you used to be an academic. You sat on the Conservative Coalition government's anti-Muslim hatred working group. You used to gather data. You used to analyse it in a sober way. Now they say you just go on the right-wing TV channel GB News. You write columns on the Daily Mail.
Oh, there's lots of left people on GB News.
You spout off, though. You cut corners. This is what they say. You push unfounded claims. You said on GB News, for example, falsely, and I quote, more than 50% of social housing in London is now occupied by people who are not British. This is not acceptable. Well, forget not being acceptable. It's not true.
I think it's about that. I think it's about 47, 48.
It's not, actually. The percentage of people who are not British in London social housing is about 14%. No. 85% of people are British citizens.
No, so my view would be, in terms of housing, we're in the middle of a housing crisis. I think we should have a principle of national preference in our housing market.
We do. 85% of people in London are British who are in social housing. No, you falsely said that more than 50% are not British. That's false.
No, across the country, more generally.
Across the country, it's 90% according to the Ministry of Housing.
When we were allocating social housing, we also used to take into account things like commitment to the community, looking after property, etc. We don't really do that anymore.
That's a fair point. That's not what you said, though. I just want to go with what you said, Matt, with respect. More than 50% of social housing in London is now occupied by people who are not British. That is not true.
I'd need to look at the statistics.
We have the statistics. According to the London government,
I also wrote...
the figure in London is 84%. According to the 2021 census data, only 14% of Londoners living in social housing did not hold a UK passport. This has been pointed out to you for the last year.
No, it hasn't.
In fact, you went back on GB News and corrected it and said 48% go to people who are headed by people who are not born in Britain, which is a different point. But you would accept the vast majority of people in social housing are British.
Let me tell you what this interview was actually about. Because it was not about immigration. It was not about social cohesion. It was not even really about Matthew Goodwin. It was about something much simpler and much more infuriating than any of that. It was about what happens when a man discovers there is more money in fear than there is in facts. I grew up around people who worked hard, paid their taxes, and trusted the experts. The academics, the researchers, the people with the credentials who were supposed to give it to you straight. And the thing that makes me angriest, not loudest, angriest, is when one of those people decides to cash that trust in. When they take everything that made people believe in them and sell it to the highest bidder. Because that is not just dishonesty, that is a betrayal. And Matthew Goodwin is Exhibit A. Let us talk about who Matthew Goodwin used to be. Because this matters. This is not a man who started out on the far right and found an audience. This is a man who spent years as an academic champion of diversity. He sat on the government's own working group against anti-Muslim hatred. He called out the far right. He analyzed them. He warned people about them. And then, somewhere along the way, he stopped analyzing the radical right and started becoming it. His critics do not say that. His former colleagues say that. People who knew him say that. And when Mehdi Hasan asked him directly what changed, his answer was that the facts changed his mind. Here is the problem with that answer. The facts did not change. Matthew Goodwin's bank account changed. Look at the trajectory. GB News, Daily Mail columns, Reform Party candidate, Substacks aimed at the right-wing grievance market. Every single move Goodwin has made in the last several years has been toward platforms and audiences that pay well for one specific product. The idea that immigration is destroying Britain and that ordinary people are victims of an out-of-touch elite, that product sells. It sells books. It sells speaking gigs. It sells Substack subscriptions. And it sells regardless of whether the numbers are accurate, because the audience that buys it does not want accuracy. They want validation. And Goodwin figured that out and made it his business model. The audience in those comment sections already know this. They said it themselves. Offshored billionaires offered him money, and he could not resist. There is more money in hate than in love. He found a way to become wealthy by supporting the corruption of the wealthy and powerful. These are not fringe opinions. These are the top comments on a viral video. Ordinary people, the exact people Goodwin claims to speak for, looked at him and saw a sellout. And they are right. Now let us talk about the lies, because we need to be precise here. Not exaggerations, not spin, lies. Goodwin went on national television and said more than 50% of social housing in London is occupied by people who are not British. He said it with confidence. He said it like a man who had done his research. The actual number, according to the 2021 census data and the London government's own figures, is 14%. 85% of people in London social housing are British, not 50% non-British. 14% non-British. He was not slightly off. He was not rounding up. He was describing a reality that does not exist. And when Hasan put the actual numbers in front of him, live on camera, Goodwin did what every caught-out fraud does. He pivoted. He moved the goalposts. He said well across the country more broadly, which is a completely different claim from the one he made. And Hasan, to his enormous credit, did not let him move. He held him there, right there on the number. Because that is what journalism is supposed to do and almost never does anymore. And here is why that matters beyond just one wrong statistic. Matthew Goodwin has built his entire public identity around being the rigorous one, the data guy, the academic who will tell you the uncomfortable truths that cowardly liberals are too afraid to say. That is his whole brand. That is what people are paying for when they subscribe to his Substack. That is what GB News is booking when they put him on. And the moment you catch him stating a number that is off by nearly 40 percentage points, his entire brand collapses, because you cannot be the data guy and be that wrong about the data, not accidentally. Not once. He has been corrected on this before, publicly, on the record, and he went back on television and said a version of it again anyway. That is not a mistake. That is a choice. Now let us talk about the mosque comment, because this one does not get discussed enough, and it should. During the riots, when mosques were being attacked, when Muslims were being threatened, when asylum hotels were being set on fire, Goodwin wrote a piece about the unrest. A long piece, thousands of words about what was really going on. And in that piece, he expressed sympathy for a woman who had been sent to prison for writing on social media that a mosque should be blown up, with the adults inside it. His argument was that she said sorry and deleted it and deserved Christian forgiveness. That is what he wrote, not condemnation. Forgiveness. For someone who called for the murder of people inside a place of worship. And then, in the same interview, Goodwin said he condemned the violence. He just somehow forgot to write that condemnation down when he had 2,000 words and an audience waiting. Hasan caught that too. He pointed out that Goodwin condemned violence against police in his piece. He did not say one word about violence against Muslims. Not one. That is not an oversight. When you are a professional writer producing a considered piece about a moment of racial violence, you do not accidentally leave out the part where you condemn the burning of mosques. You leave it out because you chose to leave it out. And here is the thing that connects all of this: the bad statistics, the sympathy for someone who called for mass murder in a mosque, the pivot from diversity champion to reform candidate. It all points to the same place, the same comment that got nearly 600 likes on that video. Offshored billionaires offered him money, and he could not resist. This is the grift. And it is not unique to Goodwin. It is a template. Find an audience that feels left behind. Tell them their anger is legitimate. Point that anger at immigrants, at Muslims, at minorities, at anyone except the people who are actually responsible for their economic insecurity. And get paid extremely well by the people who benefit from that misdirection. The billionaires funding GB News, the hedge funds bankrolling reform, the offshore money flowing into right-wing media ecosystems across the Western world. They are not funding these people because they care about ordinary working people. They are funding them because a working class that blames immigrants is a working class that is not looking at them. That is the con. And Matthew Goodwin is one of its most expensive salespeople. What you watched in that interview was not just a fact check. It was an exposure. Hasan did not just prove that Goodwin got a number wrong. He proved that Goodwin is willing to get numbers wrong in ways that are consistently convenient for a very specific political agenda and a very specific income stream. And the audience, the ordinary people Goodwin claims to champion, already see it. They said so in the comments. They always say so when someone is willing to give them the language to name what they already feel. That is what this channel exists to do. Give you the language, give you the receipts, and make sure the people running the con know that someone is keeping score. If this landed for you, share it. Put it in front of someone who has been taken in by this grift. Subscribe to Miller's Mandate if you want this kind of analysis every single time. And drop in the comments what you think really changed for Matthew Goodwin, because I already know what most of you are going to say. I am Silas Miller. The mandate does not stop here.